Few films of the era pulled off something this strange. A story about a modern aircraft carrier slipping through time, made with the kind of authenticity Hollywood rarely earns. The Final Countdown fused fantasy, military thriller, and documentary-grade footage of life at sea into one unforgettable hybrid. Behind its impossible premise sits a production story, full of dangerous flights, legal fallout, hidden cameos, and a mystery that stretches well beyond the screen itself. But none of it would exist without one near-impossible favor that opened the gates to a brand new supercarrier. Number 1. The Navy opened the gates. The greatest miracle of the production was not the time travel plot at all, but the staggering level of access granted by the United States Navy and the Department of Defense. Filmmakers were welcomed aboard the USS Nimitz itself, a working nuclear supercarrier, and given the kind of cooperation most directors only dream about. Real naval aviation units, support crews, and military institutions stood behind the project in ways that shaped nearly every frame. Timing made the deal even more remarkable. The Nimitz had only been commissioned a few years earlier, which meant audiences were watching one of the newest and most powerful ships in the world during its early years of service. The carrier carried symbolic weight as a flagship of modern American sea power, and the film captured that authority firsthand. That cooperation gave the movie its texture, its scale, and its credibility. The flight deck, the corridors, the bridge, and the operational rhythm were genuine, not built on a soundstage. Realism here came from permission, trust, and hardware that ordinary filmmakers could never touch, and that single advantage shaped everything else the production was able to attempt. Number 2. Peter Douglas built the movie. Most viewers assume the project was simply a Kirk Douglas vehicle, but the truth runs deeper than star power alone. Peter Vincent Douglas served as producer, which transformed the film from a family showcase into something far more ambitious. His role behind the scenes connected the cast, the concept, and the military cooperation into one unusually cohesive package that few independent productions of the period managed to assemble. Kirk's presence absolutely mattered. His name carried Hollywood weight, opened doors, and gave the story the kind of leading man authority that helped audiences trust the premise. Without that gravity, a tale this strange might have struggled to find serious backing in the late 70s, when studios were cautious about high-concept hybrids that mixed genres in unfamiliar ways. But Peter's producing work made the spectacle possible. Coordinating Navy access, casting choices, and a complicated shoot at sea required someone deeply invested in the details, and that hands-on commitment shows up in the finished movie. The result is a quiet, father-son Hollywood story tucked inside one of the most ambitious naval productions ever attempted, with both Douglases shaping the project from very different angles. Number 3. The title almost changed. Before audiences ever heard the name that became iconic, the project carried a different identity in its earliest paperwork. One documented working title was The Last Countdown, a small but telling difference that shows how unsettled the film's branding really was during development. A single word changed everything about the tone, the urgency, and the way viewers would later remember the entire concept. That tiny shift matters more than it might seem. Titles shape expectations long before the lights go down, and the difference between last and final carries surprising emotional weight. One feels conclusive but simple, while the other feels weighty, military, and almost apocalyptic, a phrase that suggests countdowns to launch, to disaster, or to the end of something far larger than a single voyage. The chosen name helped the picture stand out in a crowded marketplace of late 70s thrillers and military dramas. It hinted at danger without spoiling the twist, suggested scale without revealing the time travel hook, and gave the movie a memorable identity that has stuck for decades. A different word might have produced a forgotten title rather than a phrase audiences still recognize today. Number 4. Florida played the Pacific. Geography on screen rarely matches geography behind the camera, and this production leaned hard into that Hollywood tradition. Although the story revolves around Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and the open Pacific, much of the actual filming took place while the USS Nimitz operated around Florida and the Atlantic. The visual world the audience sees is a clever blend rather than a literal recreation of the waters where the 1941 attack occurred. What sells the illusion is the authenticity of everything except location. The ocean was real, the flight deck was real, the aircraft movements were real, and the daily rhythm of a working carrier was real. Audiences were watching genuine naval operations just photographed thousands of miles from where the fictional story claimed to take place, and the camera never had to fake the fundamental textures of life at sea. This approach allowed the production to look enormous without spending blockbuster money. Instead of building Pacific-themed sets or chasing distant locations, the filmmakers borrowed reality wherever the Navy could provide it. The result feels far larger than its modest budget because nearly every shipboard image carries the weight of a real environment, even when the story pretends to place that environment somewhere else entirely. Number 5. The crew became the cast. Hollywood naval films often betray themselves through their extras, where actors in fresh uniforms move through corridors with stiff, theatrical body language. This movie sidesteps that problem almost entirely. The shipboard environment was filled with genuine activity, and many of the people glimpsed in the background were actual sailors going about routines that no casting agent could have replicated convincingly on a soundstage. That authenticity bleeds into every wide shot. The way personnel handle equipment, walk through narrow passageways, react to flight operations, and inhabit the spaces around them carries a confidence that comes only from real experience. Their movements are economical, their postures correct, and their familiarity with the carrier obvious in ways that no rehearsal could fake. A trained eye picks up on these details immediately, and even casual viewers feel the difference without being able to name it. The cast worked alongside this living backdrop, which raised everyone's performance. Actors had to match the natural energy around them, and the carrier itself became a kind of co-star whose crew added texture no script could provide. This is one of the main reasons the picture avoids feeling like standard Hollywood naval dress-up, and why it still holds up for viewers who know what genuine shipboard life actually looks like. Number 6. A Lost Triangle Mystery. Early development reportedly pushed the story in a very different direction than the one audiences eventually saw. Initial concepts leaned closer to a Bermuda Triangle-style mystery, where strange disappearances and paranormal ocean legends would have driven the supernatural element. That version would have placed the picture alongside other late 70s fascinations with unexplained sea phenomena, tapping into a cultural obsession that was peaking right around the time cameras began rolling. What audiences received instead is something stranger and more restrained. The finished version uses a mysterious electrical storm that arrives without warning and departs without explanation, leaving the time travel mechanism deliberately vague. Characters speculate, theorize, and ultimately accept the impossible without ever pinning down what actually happened, which gives the storm a weight that a more familiar triangle framing might have undermined. That choice may have strengthened the film in unexpected ways. A triangle-themed origin would have placed the story inside a recognizable mythology, complete with audience expectations and pop culture baggage. The unexplained storm refuses to belong to any existing legend, which keeps the mystery genuinely open. Viewers leave with questions instead of answers, and the picture becomes harder to categorize, harder to dismiss, and ultimately harder to forget. Number 7. Producers hit on screen. After all the heavy talk of military access and production logistics, the movie hides a delightful little secret in plain sight. Peter Douglas, who shaped the entire project from behind the scenes, actually appears on camera during the film. Lloyd Kaufman also turns up in a small credited role, adding another layer of behind-the-scenes personnel who literally stepped into the frame rather than staying tucked away in the production trailers. These appearances are easy to miss on a first viewing. The movie moves fast, the carrier environment is overwhelming, and most audiences are focused on the central mystery rather than scanning the background for familiar faces. But once viewers know to look, the cameos become a fun puzzle, a kind of hidden signature from the people who made the project happen against considerable logistical odds. The Easter eggs also tell a deeper story about how the picture was made. This was not a distant studio production where executives signed checks from faraway offices. The team behind the camera was deeply embedded in the daily reality of the shoot, willing to step in front of the lens when needed and clearly invested in every detail. That hands-on culture helps explain why the finished movie feels so personal compared with the corporate filmmaking of the same era. Number 8. VF-84 Flew the Heroes. The aerial sequences carry a weight that ordinary movie magic cannot fake, and there is a clear reason for that authenticity. Real naval aviators connected to VF-84, the legendary Jolly Roger squadron, helped create the film's most exciting flying material. These were not stunt pilots hired for the production, but working military flyers who flew the F-14 Tomcat as part of their daily operational lives aboard the carrier. That distinction shows up in every aerial frame. The pilots understood the aircraft at a level no civilian could match, knew the rhythms of carrier launches and recoveries, and respected the genuine dangers of operating supersonic jets near a moving ship at sea. Their flying carries the precision of professionals who do this work for real, with margins for error measured in feet, rather than the comfortable distances Hollywood productions usually demand. The squadron deserves recognition as unofficial co-authors of the picture's aviation credibility. Without their participation, the F-14 sequences would have required staged compromises, simulated maneuvers, or borrowed footage that audiences would have detected instantly. Instead, the movie captured genuine naval aviation at full intensity, preserving on film a moment when the Tomcat was new, glamorous, and operated by some of the most skilled flyers the Navy could put in a cockpit. Number 9. The Hawkeye saw it all. While glamorous fighter jets dominate the highlight reels, another aircraft quietly steals the strategic spotlight throughout the picture. The E-2 Hawkeye, with its distinctive radar dome perched above the fuselage, represents the real intelligence advantage of a modern carrier group. Surveillance, coordination, early warning, and command control all flow through this unassuming twin-prop aircraft, which sees threats long before any fighter pilot could spot them visually. That capability becomes the dramatic heart of the time travel premise. In 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor succeeded, partly because American forces had no way to detect incoming aircraft from sufficient range to mount a defense. By 1980, the Hawkeye orbiting above a carrier group could identify, track, and coordinate responses to threats hundreds of miles away. The contrast between those two worlds is staggering, and the movie quietly understands what that gap actually means. This is why the Nimitz on screen represents far more than a ship carrying jets. It functions as a floating system of information and power, where radar data, communications, and decision-making converge into something the 1941 Navy could barely have imagined. The Hawkeye is the visual symbol of that transformation, and viewers who pay attention to its role in the picture come away with a much richer understanding of what modern carrier operations actually involve. Number 10. Tora haunted the film. Recreating the aircraft of 1941 required more than fresh paint and Hollywood imagination. The production borrowed heavily from earlier Pearl Harbor cinema, drawing on material and aircraft lineage connected to the massive 1970 epic Tora. That earlier project had assembled a remarkable collection of converted vintage planes built to resemble Japanese fighters and bombers, and those resources continued circulating through later films that needed convincing 1941 imagery. The result creates a strange layered effect that rewards close attention. A time travel movie about visiting the past was partly built from the recycled pieces of previous attempts to recreate that same past. Aircraft that had once flown for an earlier generation of filmmakers returned for a new project with a completely different premise, carrying their own production history into fresh footage that audiences now experience as a single, seamless illusion. That lineage gives the movie a quiet sense of cinematic memory. The 1941 attack scenes are not pure invention, but rather an extension of decades of filmmaking dedicated to capturing that moment in history. The picture is not only about time travel within its story, it is also built from cinematic time capsules that connect different eras of Hollywood craft, with each generation of filmmakers passing tools and resources to the next in ways most viewers never realize. Number 11. A Bond artist made time. After all the steel uniforms and procedural realism, the picture takes a sudden detour into pure visual fantasy. Maurice Binder, the artist famous for crafting the iconic gun barrel sequences and abstract title designs connected to the James Bond franchise, contributed to the film's strange time travel storm. His influence brings a flash of pop art surrealism to a movie otherwise grounded in jets, command corridors, and military procedure. The storm sequence stands apart from everything around it on purpose. Where the rest of the picture leans hard into authenticity, this moment becomes deliberately abstract, swirling with color, motion, and dreamlike imagery that refuses to imitate any real weather phenomenon. It feels closer to a title sequence than a special effect, a hallucinatory interruption that breaks the rules of the surrounding reality without trying to explain itself. That contrast is exactly why the effect works. Audiences accept the impossible because the visual language signals a shift away from documentary realism into something mythic and strange. A more conventional storm built with traditional effects might have felt cheap or unconvincing, but Binder's approach embraces the unreality of the event. The transition between eras becomes a moment of pure cinema rather than a technical problem the filmmakers had to solve. Number 12. Cameras rode the Tomcats. Capturing fighter jets at full intensity required a level of technical ambition that pushed late 70s aerial photography to its limits. The production used aircraft-mounted camera systems to create unusually immersive footage, placing lenses where audiences had rarely been allowed to ride. The result was material that felt closer to the cockpit experience than most Hollywood movies had ever managed, with shots that conveyed real speed, real movement, and real proximity to high-performance aviation. This was more than another collection of cool flying images. The crew was experimenting with how to photograph supersonic aircraft in ways that preserved the visceral feeling of being airborne, including angles that captured the rush of carrier launches, the violence of catapult acceleration, and the disorienting beauty of formation flight at altitude. Each setup carried genuine engineering challenges since cameras had to survive forces that would destroy ordinary equipment. That visual experimentation helped shape the broader evolution of aviation cinema. Later productions would push these techniques even further, refining the language of jet-age filmmaking until aerial sequences became a recognized art form. This earlier project sits as an important step along that path, demonstrating what was possible when filmmakers had genuine military cooperation and the willingness to mount cameras in places no commercial production had attempted before. Number 13. One landing was real. Among the picture's many memorable moments, one recovery sequence carries weight that pure stunt work could never provide. A key landing scene was connected to genuine operational activity rather than a controlled, choreographed performance staged purely for the camera. That detail changes everything about how viewers should understand what they are watching, because the people involved were working inside a fully active military environment with all of its real demands. The implications stretch beyond simple authenticity. Carrier landings rank among the most dangerous routine activities in military aviation, with pilots catching arresting wires at high speed on a deck that pitches and rolls with the sea. Adding film cameras to that environment introduced extra coordination challenges, and the crew had to work around naval procedures rather than dictating them. Safety belonged to the ship, not to the production, and that hierarchy shaped every shooting decision. This thin line between fictional drama and operational reality runs through the entire project. The story may revolve around an impossible time travel premise, but the carrier deck did not pause for a Hollywood schedule. The picture is, in many ways, a fake premise surrounded by genuine peril, where actors and crew shared workspace with personnel performing missions that carried real consequences. That tension gives the footage an edge no studio set could ever manufacture. Number 14. The Zero fight got scary. The picture's most striking visual confrontation pairs sleek modern fighters against vintage-style propeller aircraft built to resemble World War II Japanese Zeros. That image alone drives much of the film's appeal, because audiences had never seen anything quite like it. 40 years of aviation history collapsed into a single frame, with two completely different generations of warplane sharing the same airspace under the same camera lens. The danger behind those shots was very real. Modern jets and slower vintage aircraft operate with wildly different speeds, turning circles and aerodynamic behaviors. Wake turbulence from a fast fighter can violently disturb a smaller propeller plane flying nearby, and matching their movements for the camera reportedly created serious risk during the aerial staging. Pilots had to coordinate maneuvers that pushed the limits of what was safely possible without losing the visual drama the scene required. What makes the sequence unforgettable is that the impossible image on screen was almost too real to control. The filmmakers were not compositing aircraft together in post-production, but actually flying these machines in the same sky, capturing genuine encounters between eras. That commitment to physical reality is exactly why the footage still holds up decades later, even as digital effects have made similar imagery cheap and routine elsewhere in cinema. Number 15. Sheen was the outsider. Among a cast filled with sailors, pilots, and command-level officers, one character holds a uniquely valuable position within the story. Warren Lasky, played by Martin Sheen, is a civilian observer rather than a military insider, which makes him the perfect outsider aboard the Nimitz. He moves through the carrier without belonging to its culture, asking the questions an audience would naturally ask if dropped into the same environment. That role carries real dramatic weight. Lasky speaks for the viewer, observing the military world with a curiosity that allows the picture to explain itself without resorting to clumsy exposition. His presence also creates space for genuine moral debate, since he sits outside the chain of command and can raise concerns that uniformed officers might never voice aloud. Layered on top of all that is the lingering mystery connected to the unseen Mr. Tideman, which gives Lasky's arc a quiet sense of significance. Without this character, the project could easily have felt sealed off and inaccessible. A film populated entirely by military professionals talking among themselves risks alienating general audiences who do not share that vocabulary or worldview. Sheen's outsider perspective bridges that gap with thoughtful intelligence, giving everyday viewers a guide who shares their confusion and curiosity, and ultimately their wonder at the impossible situation unfolding around them. Number 16. The F-14 Hours Scandal. The same spectacular access that gave the picture its authenticity later became the center of a serious legal storm. Commander Emery Worth Brown Jr., who was connected to the F-14 squadron used during production, faced accusations of underreporting the actual number of flight hours consumed by the filming. What had looked on the surface like routine government cooperation turned out to involve numbers that did not match reality, and federal investigators eventually took notice of the gap. The contrast in figures tells a startling story. The Navy was reportedly reimbursed for around 32.5 hours of flight time tied to the production, while the government later alleged the real total was closer to 200 hours. That gap between billed and actual usage represents an enormous discrepancy in taxpayer resources, since each hour of F-14 operation carried significant fuel, maintenance, and personnel costs that someone ultimately had to absorb. Brown was also found guilty of receiving an illegal payment connected to the film companies involved. The irony cuts deep. The very access that made the aerial footage feel so authentic also created one of the most serious off-screen controversies tied to any military-supported movie of the era. Audiences watching the dazzling Tomcat sequences had no way of knowing those frames were quietly connected to an unfolding scandal. And the case stands as a cautionary example of what can go wrong when Hollywood and the armed forces blur the line between cooperation and exploitation. Number 17. The ship stole the film. Critics and viewers have long argued that the carrier itself emerged as the picture's true lead performer. While Kirk Douglas, Martin Sheen, and the rest of the cast carry the human drama, the camera captured a working supercarrier with a level of access that simply did not exist elsewhere in mainstream cinema. Audiences were seeing the inner life of a vessel most civilians would never set foot on, photographed during normal operations rather than staged for the lens. That fascination shapes how the movie has been remembered over time. The actors give the story its shape, its emotional anchor, and its moral weight, but the ship gives it awe. Long takes of the flight deck, glimpses of corridors and command spaces, and the quiet majesty of a carrier slicing through open ocean carry a power that no individual performance could ever replace. Viewers walk away remembering steel and sky as vividly as any line of dialogue. This is exactly why aviation enthusiasts and military history fans continue returning to the picture, even when they openly debate the plot's many quirks. The story may divide audiences, but the documentary quality of the carrier footage unites them. Few films have captured a Nimitz-class vessel with this much intimacy, and that visual record has become a kind of historical document in its own right, preserving an era of naval power that has since evolved well beyond what the camera saw. Number 18. The big battle never came. The premise sets up the ultimate alternate history fantasy with almost teasing precision. A modern carrier finds itself positioned to stop the attack on Pearl Harbor, equipped with weapons and aircraft that could devastate the incoming 1941 strike force in minutes. Audiences settle in expecting fireworks, certain that the picture is building toward an explosive collision between two eras of warfare that history never actually allowed to meet. That confrontation never fully arrives. The movie pulls back from delivering the expected battle, choosing instead a more philosophical conclusion that left some viewers genuinely frustrated. After all the buildup, the careful establishment of the Nimitz's capabilities, and the moral debates among officers about whether to intervene, the picture refuses to give audiences the catharsis they came expecting. Some critics treated this restraint as a failure, arguing the story flinched at its own boldest possibility. But that withholding is exactly what makes the project so memorable. A simple action fantasy would have aged into just another what-if war movie, satisfying in the moment and forgotten soon after. By denying the easy payoff, the filmmakers turned the story into something stranger and more thoughtful, a meditation on history, fate, and consequence, rather than a power fantasy. The picture's lasting power comes from the battle it withholds, not the action it actually shows. Number 19. Charlie became a legend. After all the scandals, moral debates, and aerial peril, the movie hides a much warmer secret in its quieter moments. Charlie, the small dog aboard the ship, becomes one of the most unexpectedly charming presences in the entire production. In a story crowded with jets, officers, time storms, and looming historical questions, this little four-legged character adds a dose of ordinary humanity that softens the surrounding intensity. The choice feels almost subversive when you consider the genre. Military dramas of the late 70s typically traded in seriousness, hierarchy, and disciplined imagery, with little room for sentiment that might undercut the tone. A dog wandering through scenes alongside hardened sailors quietly humanizes the entire vessel, suggesting that even on a nuclear supercarrier preparing for impossible decisions, life still includes simple companionship and small moments of warmth. There is a gentle irony tucked into the character's role. In a film fixated on time travel, alternate history, and cosmic mysteries, one of the most beloved figures is neither pilot, commander, nor scientific observer. The audience finds itself rooting for the dog as much as for any human protagonist, and Charlie ultimately stands as a reminder that even the grandest stories rest on the smallest details. Decades later, fans still mention this little companion with genuine affection. Number 20. A cult hit survived. Box office numbers tell only part of any movie's story, and this picture is a perfect example of how survival can matter more than initial success. The film was not a massive blockbuster during its theatrical run, but it never disappeared from cultural memory either. Television broadcasts, home video releases, and dedicated communities of aviation and military history fans kept the project alive across decades when many bigger films of the same era quietly faded from view. Cult status fits the movie naturally. The premise is too unusual, too specific, and too genre-blending to behave like a normal studio thriller, which makes it perfect for the kind of audience that loves discovering forgotten gems rather than following mainstream trends. Viewers fascinated by carrier operations, by alternate history, or by the strange beauty of late 70s practical filmmaking have all claimed this picture as their own, building its reputation slowly over time. That gradual rediscovery may have suited the project better than instant mainstream domination ever would have. A massive opening weekend brings short attention but rarely deep loyalty, while word-of-mouth survival creates fans who return to a movie repeatedly across the years. Today, the picture exists as a beloved curiosity rather than a forgotten flop, and its long afterlife stands as evidence that some stories simply need patience to find the audiences who appreciate them most. Number 21. The book went stranger. Even after the credits roll, the story has one more secret waiting for fans who looked deeper. The novelization by Martin Kaidin, a respected aviation writer with deep credibility in military fiction, accompanied the film's release and broadly follows the same plot. But anyone who picks up the book quickly discovers that it does not simply transcribe the movie onto the page in the way most novelizations do. Kaidin pushed the time travel phenomenon considerably further than the picture allowed. Where the film leaves the strange storm largely unexplained, the book expands on its nature, suggests stranger possibilities about what the crew actually experienced, and leans harder into speculative territory that the movie deliberately kept restrained. Readers familiar only with the screen version often find themselves surprised by how much further the prose adventure travels, and how differently the mystery feels when given room to breathe. This makes the novelization something more interesting than a tie-in product. It functions as a hidden alternate version of the story, not a deleted scene or a lost cut, but rather an expanded interpretation by an author, with his own ideas about what the premise really meant. Even after audiences think they know the full story, the final countdown still has one more weird secret tucked away on the bookshelf, waiting for curious fans who want to follow the mystery a little further. What endures about the final countdown is the way it operates as 3 different movies at once. It is an alternate history thriller chasing one of the wildest what-if premises ever filmed. A real naval aviation showcase preserving a moment when the Nimitz and its aircraft stood at the height of their power, and a strange record of what happens when Hollywood gets unusually close to the machinery of military life. Its quirks and frustrations are part of the fascination rather than flaws to be fixed. Few films combine such a bold premise with such authentic hardware, personnel, and atmosphere, and that rare combination is exactly why audiences keep returning to it decades after its release. If this journey through the film's hidden history brought you something new, please like and subscribe to support more deep dives like this one. Now, we want to hear from you in the comments. If you had been aboard the Nimitz that day, would you have changed history or protected it?